The world has to dramatically increase investments in infrastructure to meet the needs of populations and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. New, resilient, inclusive, and sustainable infrastructures will help societies to bounce back from future shocks and to reduce carbon emissions, driving growth and competitiveness. Estimates display a $15 trillion gap in infrastructure investment across the globe. How can we accelerate innovation in finance to fund infrastructures? Which frameworks and best practices could boost sustainable infrastructure building? With the Frame the Future conversation series, we are engaging corporations, nonprofits, government agencies, universities, entrepreneurs, and you. We are bringing forward 5 future-defining topics: innovation, partnership, sustainability, resilience, and inclusiveness. With each topic, we're bringing forward new ideas, sharing insights, and driving change. Join global leaders and us on August 11th to frame the future of infrastructure. Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, GFCC.
Welcome. My name is Roberto Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the GFCC. It's great to have you here today. We're live on Zoom and also on YouTube. This is our Frame the Future conversation series. The GFCC, it's a global multi-stakeholder organization. We have universities, corporations, private sector councils and other entities, and government agencies as members. Working with this global community, we have launched this conversation series in June 2021 to explore how 5 future-defining elements: innovation, sustainability, resilience, inclusiveness, and partnership can be weaved into competitiveness strategies. We are reviewing a variety of competitiveness strategy dimensions, and one of them is infrastructure. I'm happy to be here today with leaders joining us from Paris, from Washington, D.C., from Doha, from Helsinki, and you all from different parts of the globe. I will briefly explain this conversation, and I really wanted to invite all of you to be part of that. So please join us throughout the session using the Q&A feature. Share your questions with us. If you have any cases, any reports, any best practices related to infrastructure development, feel free to share that. We would love to hear from you. This session lasts for 90 minutes. We'll have an initial round, and then our chairman, Chad Holliday, will lead a conversation with our guests today. So before we turn to Dan, I really want to invite GFCC President Deborah Winston-Smith to join us here. Welcome, everybody, and tell a bit about the amazing group of people we have here today. Deborah, over to you.
Thank you, Roberto. And on behalf of the GFCC, let me also welcome our distinguished panelists and those listening and participating around the world. We want this to be a very interactive session. And first, let me thank our distinguished chairman, Chad Holliday, for being with us today and for being our moderator. I know we will have a very dynamic conversation under his leadership. Let me just make a few comments in my role also as president and CEO of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, because infrastructure, defined largely, has always been one of the key platforms to enable productivity growth, economic growth, and prosperity and security for citizens in our own countries and around the world. Indeed, some years ago, when the U.S. Council launched our major focus on innovation, which continues today, we defined 4 pillars: technology, talent, investment, and infrastructure, and how they intersect together. And today, under the GFCC, Frame the Future, we have, of course, added the critical dimensions, more important than ever, of sustainability and resiliency. And let me just say, yesterday was a milestone in the United States. We had bipartisan legislation that was passed in our Senate for a $1 trillion infrastructure bill known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which will not only be focused on modernizing roads, bridges, ports, and other physical infrastructure, but very importantly, addressing inclusivity issues around access, universal access to broadband connectivity, which we know during the pandemic was a huge barrier to many in the world to participate and communicate, and of course, go to school and study. So this is a real milestone in the United States. I will also say that we interpret infrastructure as well to be human infrastructure, the ability of people to be educated no matter where they live. And also, we're very excited that in this infrastructure bill, there will also be efforts to modernize our tremendous national laboratories, our universities that need new research laboratories and other facilities in order to stay at the cutting edge of the most advanced research and development. So as Roberto says, we have an incredibly distinguished group of leaders today that are going to join us. And Roberto, I'm going to turn it back to you to do the formal introductions because you do it in such a beautiful way and capture the essence of everyone. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. So let me quickly introduce our colleagues here before we go for our initial round of conversations. I wanted to get started with our colleague and my friend, Mahmoud Abdulahad. Mahmoud is the Chief Strategy person at the Office of the President of Qatar University. He holds a PhD in electrical engineering, but above all, Mahmoud is the person driving, or one of the key leaders driving the transformation and innovation strategy for Qatar University. So unfortunately, President Hassan was not able to join us due to a last-minute health issue. We hope he is well and will be well, but we are delighted to have you here with us today, Mahmoud. We have our chairman, Chad Holliday. Chad, until recently, was the chairman of the board of Royal Dutch Shell. He is the chairman emeritus of the Council on Competitiveness. He played a variety of roles in business in the past. Chad used to be the chairman and CEO of DuPont, and he sits on a variety of boards. Chad, it's always an inspiration to have you leading our organization. And with us, thank you so much for being here. Joining us early morning from California, we have Elisa Jaggerson. Elisa is a venture capitalist today. She's a VP, a general partner at Wildcat Venture Partners, where she oversees the new climate tech portfolio that's closely related to some of the most critical issues that we have in the world today. Elisa, it's a design business leader. If you in her previous company at Spec Design, she one of the things that she did, she planned, designed, and oversaw the implementation of all Apple stores in the globe, with working with Stevie Jobs and the Apple team. So great to have you here today, Elisa. Joining us today from Paris, we have Franny Lautier. Franny is the CEO of Southbridge Investment. That's a business unit under the Southbridge Group. She has been working on project finance and also fostering infrastructure investment, mostly in Africa. But Franny goes a long way back in relation to infrastructure development. She was the head, the person for infrastructure at the World Bank. She worked in developing, among other things, the infrastructure initiative under the Clinton administration and helping that in the United States, and has been active all over the globe. So Franny, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for joining us in a short notice. We're delighted to have you. From Helsinki, we have Henrietta Moon. Henrietta is an entrepreneur, an incredibly dynamic person that I had a pleasure to meet a few years ago in California. Henrietta is the CEO and co-founder of Carbon Culture, a company that is bringing to the world an innovative biocharcoal solution to capture carbon. She has been involved with new ventures for several years. She's the youngest leader to sit at the board of a NASDAQ listed company. She was one of the main forces behind Slush, the entrepreneurship festival in Finland. It's great to have you here with us, Henrietta. So to get us started, we will have an initial round, and I will invite each one of you to provide like a perspective, 5 minutes about infrastructure development and the nexus connecting that with sustainability, innovation, resilience. And I wanted to get it started with you, Franny. So as you played a variety of roles in international organizations, finance institutions, you are driving an investment in infrastructures in Africa now. We know that we need to boost investments in infrastructure around the globe. We have a gap, a growing gap. How can we address that? And at the same time, how can we leverage the potential of innovative, sustainable technologies to make new infrastructures more sustainable? So over to you, Franny.
Thank you very much, Roberto. It's a pleasure to be joining such an illustrious group, and I very much appreciated the opening remarks that Deborah made, because it takes me way back to the 1990s when I started working on infrastructure and looking at the evolution of what we expect infrastructure to do, not only for competitiveness, but also for the very essence of life, as we have learned with COVID, how important it was to have refrigeration, to have telecommunications, to have transport systems, supply chain logistics, which were highly disrupted during the COVID period, and brought a whole new thinking around what is the role of infrastructure and why it is so important to think about it in a dynamic way. And I'm also very fortunate because I've worked on infrastructure issues in countries at different levels of development, from more mature infrastructure systems, such as in the United States, where the question now is rehabilitation, modernization, retooling, refitting, and then bridging the gaps of infrastructure that are now materializing because of so many new demands on the system, from resilience to cybersecurity, but also to having the infrastructure serve social purposes, whether it's education, health, jobs, and other dimensions. But then you have the other extreme, which are the developing countries and the emerging economies, where because there is no infrastructure, there is an opportunity for innovation and leapfrogging that has actually become a very dynamic place where lessons can be learned from both sides of how you deal with new ideas that are coming in because you have gaps. We have the very exciting examples, for instance, in telecommunications, because there was no ability, it was too expensive to give fixed line phones. Many developing countries jumped immediately to mobile communications, and that gave a whole revolution in the way we think about payment systems, the way we think about e-commerce, the way we think about education, and a whole series of areas. The second area, which I think I'm quite excited about, it's a very good time to be involved in infrastructure, because if you look at the challenges that we have, it raises a huge opportunity for young people who are just thinking about a career to go and think about infrastructure in a multidisciplinary way. Because it's not only the trunk infrastructure, which is important as that is, but it's also everything that is riding on it, and that can be the platform for creativity, innovation, and opportunities to do other things on top of that infrastructure. I take an example of trunk infrastructure. If you are investing in pipelines for oil and gas, now those pipelines can be used to transport green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. So that gives a whole new value to those pipeline networks. If you invested in transport and logistics that was carrying heavy duty trucks that are fossil fuel based, you have an opportunity to move towards electric vehicles, hydrogen-based vehicles, and a whole new infrastructure that grows on top of that trunk highway system that you have. So it's very exciting to be engaged right now. But maybe the last two areas I'll comment in the interest of time is alternatives for financing. Because as infrastructure has become more complex and the demands on it have become more important, there are new ways of financing that have come on top of that. So you take examples like sale leaseback, where the state or the municipalities can sell to the private sector or lease to the private sector infrastructure it is already created and therefore de-risked, and then use that capital to do these very things that we need now, like resilience, modernization, and innovation in the infrastructure systems, because capital is very, very limited, and you don't always want to finance it through taxes because that has other economic effects. Then you have other solutions, for instance, innovative insurance mechanisms. You have all of the flooding and the droughts and climate-related risks, and that gives birth to innovative ways to insure the infrastructure and ensure the activities that run on it. You have many other innovations, for example, the debt to nature swaps. If you have countries where the forests are being challenged because of climate change or sea level rises, these countries are also indebted and they can't therefore raise the financing that they need to build the infrastructure. So you can go to the market and get swaps for that, like what Seychelles has done, raising $400 million to finance their infrastructure needs. You have other things that are related, which are very interesting: social bonds, sustainability bonds, very interesting private-public partnerships, for instance, where you can look at a value chain in agriculture and bring in different types of financing, or look at a system like logistics and industrial parks and bring in innovations there as well. And then finally, I will close with the idea of green financing, which has brought some exciting opportunities in finance that combine, for example, the role of national development banks. You have USAID, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and others in the US, but almost every country has a national development bank, and others have regional development banks, and of course the multilateral development banks as well. They can now come in and take these long-term 30, 50-year risks and allow financing to flow to solve many problems. So I'll stop here and look very much forward to engaging with Chad and the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Franny. And so 3 things are here in my mind after listening to you. We can do differently, and even countries can leapfrog. Infrastructure can be cool, and we can and should involve entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of opportunities to innovate in finance. So thank you for sharing that. And Elisa, what are your reflections? You are a venture capitalist. You are funding climate tech companies that really are at the intersection of innovation, the climate, and critical infrastructures. What are you looking for when you think about climate tech?
Thank you, Roberto. It's a great question because it's a very big field. And one of the aspects that's so important about this conversation is obviously my focus in climate tech. The theme of our Wildcat Ventures is B2B for a better world. We have partners focused on healthcare, on fintech. I'm climate tech and future of work. But the climate tech is unfortunately not a vertical play. It's a vertical and horizontal play, because I use the word play because one must in the world of venture capital. But we are looking at a lot of intersectionality. Climate meets finance, climate meets healthcare, climate meets and future of work. Of course, they all intersect. I was just I'm struck on a daily basis how tragically misinformed the both corporate population, the policy population is on, as you dig deeper and deeper on sort of the gap between all of the targets we have around climate at this, even if you add up the very best, most ambitious targets combined, we are still about 70% off of what's needed. So policy is a key piece, but we're going to get there through innovation at the front end. So long way of saying, my focus at this point is really, I got very intrigued by becoming a venture capitalist because we finance the beginning of the cycle. We invest, in our case, sort of in that, $5 million to $12 million right at the beginning of a company's life cycle, right as they're about to cross the chasm, very specifically, over into scale. And we are trying to come at the solution that way. It's been a long journey to get here. I'll just quickly comment that that this journey to coming to the conversation of innovation really has come from one of the things I'd love to think about today with this group is coming at it from all of the different angles. I started in policy working on affordable housing infrastructure right in 1994 when the US was transitioning from one party to another party after 40 years, and started at that point to make the case for, as a sort of young right out of college, making the case for a shift in infrastructure. I was looking at policy, I was looking at housing and banking policy in financial terms, looking for where can you do well by doing good, and not to use the old adage, and learning to make the case in those terms right in the first Newt Gingrich's first 100 days has sort of been a theme for me ever since. And I still come to this job right now in climate tech, looking at the places where investors, my job is to deliver extraordinary returns to LPs on one end, limited partners who can say, thank God that went incredibly well because I'll do it again. And 10 years ago, we had a climate tech, it was called Clean Tech at the time, a climate tech boom around 2010, tremendous amount of money invested, and it was a bust. And and it took 10 years to get venture capitalists and early stage investors back into the game. I'll talk a little bit more about this later. We cannot afford another 10 years. So I see my job very simply as a teeny little cog in a very complex wheel at the very beginning of the life cycle of the financing ecosystem. And if I'm successful, or the folks at my early stage are successful, then that'll play a positive role. And my job is to basically make this, I'm focused on the aspect of it, which is make it sustainable and financially rewarding. And thus, of course, more importantly, grow the companies, support the companies that are incredibly successful and serve as the platform. So we're focused on software companies that can enable climate change. And then, of course, the future of work, the humans that have to live on the planet in this new ecosystem. So I guess my focus is, for me at least, and this is a narrow view on it, is focus on finding the aspects that can generate returns that make this entire system more sustainable, and because we can't afford another lag.
So you are in search for those levers, those sweet spots that could make good and generate great returns. So
that's right.
Thank you for sharing that, Elisa. But also, if I may, I think that your comments about the beginning of your career were very interesting, because you said you started in policy, then you came to business, to design, innovation, and then venture capital. That's an amazing trajectory. But it also reminds me about this possibility, but also need to bring together different perspectives to make a difference. So thanks for sharing that, Elisa. Mahmoud, I want to turn to you. We've been together in Doha, and you are driving innovation and transformation at Qatar University. And I'm Brazilian, so Brazilians are very much about soccer. I am known because I am the worst soccer player ever born in Brazil, right? But Qatar is making huge infrastructure investments, including for the upcoming World Cup, right? But Qatar University has been launching new centers like the one that President Alderhan has led for smart mobility and transportation. So really focusing on infrastructure and smart infrastructures. At the same time, you are personal lead and working with Hassan, innovation and entrepreneurship at the university, and thinking about the future. So what's your take on how to connect those dots? Infrastructure, university innovation, new businesses, working with entrepreneurs. Over to you, Mahmoud.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And thank you very much, Chad and Deborah, for inviting Qatar University to be the voice of academia on this very important topic, actually. Let me put it a little bit in context about Qatar and Qatar University. So I think things started from the Qatar National Vision, which was launched back in 2008. The Vision 2030 of the state of Qatar has been focusing on sustainable development on four main pillars: human capital, economic development, social development, and environmental development. And this started to cascade down, maybe slowly, maybe a little bit quicker, and so on, throughout the national development strategies, throughout the different various programs that the government is funding, from infrastructure, from economic diversification, R&D, and education as well. There are several mega projects has been initiated in Qatar related to infrastructure, in particular for preparation for the World Cup 2022, including stadiums, including roads, new cities, and so on. And one of the most remarkable ones is building a new city, which is Lusail City. It's on the edge of Doha. And that was meant to be the first sustainable city in the country. And that was considered in everything in terms of energy, materials of construction, and so on. And that city will host the stadium of the finals of the World Cup 2022. There are other multiple developments in terms of sustainability included in the railway, in the rail development, in downtown renovation, and so on. And from that national vision also, when the President Hassan came into the presidency, he had a vision for transformation in Qatar University and initiated a university-wide strategic development exercise that it drove on these elements of human capital development, sustainable human capital development, economic, social, and environmental, and developed new vision for the university, as well as new strategies in which innovation was actually at the core. Starting from the vision in which the university would become a catalyst for sustainable socio-economic development of the state of Qatar, and in embedding innovation, entrepreneurship, digitalization, and several aspects of sustainability as well across the university strategy. Hassan himself is also a civil engineer, and he was a VP for research in that domain, in that area. He initiated the Qatar Mobility Innovation Center, which was back in 2009, together with the champions from the College of Engineering. That was the first, let's say, sustainable technologies focus center, innovation center in the region here, focus on smart city solutions, particularly looking on sustainable mobility, on environmental monitoring, and so on. Currently, the university has a lot of research projects, also R&D projects in terms of water treatment, in environmental sustainability, in ICT for sustainable development. And these were coming because of the funding from QNRF, Qatar National Research Fund, which is driven by the vision of the national country. Why I'm doing on kind of this, mentioning this circle, because one of the things probably about discussions today is how we can drive sustainability or sustainable technologies development acceleration. And in my experience, it has been driven in Qatar by the government at the very initial stage. And then there were champions here and there that took it over. And there was a strategy, which was very important, I think, to drive this particular thing. What we think about in the university in the next strategic cycle is to develop a standalone sustainability strategy that across all the functions, from education, from R&D, from entrepreneurship, economic development, and focus on developing curriculum, integrated R&D projects, as well as startups for sustainable development on the various domains, whether infrastructure or human capital domain or societal domain. So that is in a nutshell what we are trying to do in the university.
Thank you, Mahmoud. It would be great, well, afterwards, if you could share maybe a bit more about your entrepreneurship progress and how do you connect that. But what stuck into my mind here is it's really this connection between a country that's energy intensive, we know that, but that's making investments to give some momentum to sustainable technologies. So thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that there are many questions that can arise from there, but thanks for that. For all of you who are joining the session, please feel free to start sharing questions and use the Q&A feature that will help us to see the questions. I know that we already have some resources being shared here in the chat too. So always I invite people to even to download the chat. We normally have different resources being shared, so please pay attention to that. And Rieta, I want to turn to you because you are an entrepreneur. You've been working with entrepreneurs. You've been fostering entrepreneurship, and we've been involved with digital technologies and startups. But you decided to invest your time in your life to build a carbon sequestration company. On the one hand, it's great to have a young leader like you driving that, but also if you could comment about how you go from digital to hard stuff and why are you doing that?
Well, yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here. Great to be here. I'm calling in from Helsinki. I'm the CEO of a company called Carboculture. We're a Nordic Californian company drawing down CO2 and sequestering it for over 1,000 years. So essentially, we turn plant matter into a stable form of carbon called biocarbon. And in this way, it's safe and it can be used not only for carbon sequestration, but also for urban infrastructure, for example. So great to be here. Yeah, so the transition to doing hardware, which is hard, is tremendous, but we don't have a choice. And I think that's something that I wanted to bring up in these couple of minutes to start off with, is that everybody saw the IPCC recent announcement this week, and we understand even better what our carbon budgets are for the safe boundaries of remaining under 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. And so we know that we need to not just halve our emissions by 2030, but actually get to net zero by 2050. And now, what does net zero mean? So net zero doesn't actually mean that you can buy cheap offsets that are like giving the money to green energy projects or something else. It means that we actually have to physically bring down the carbon atoms from the atmosphere that are above that zero by 2050. And so that is extremely difficult. Think about capturing parts per million out of the air. It is very tedious and requires a lot of infrastructure and a lot of investment. And so we all know that it's easier and cheaper to cut the emissions before putting them in the atmosphere and then having to remove them. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up today. And of course, if we don't do any carbon cuts, then our carbon budget is something like 5 to 10 years to stay in the safe zone. So that's unacceptable, and we need to drive those emission reductions immediately. And this is coming from a carbon removal entrepreneur who of course wants a lot of business, but we have way too much business. The carbon removal market today is about 3 million tons, and it needs to get to over 10 billion tons by 2050. And this is tremendous amounts of hardware, chemistry, and all sorts of things that have to happen. And our process is energy positive, but there are a lot of processes that are not, so they might require even more energy. So yeah, so a couple of things about infrastructure. One is that we need more climate infrastructure, not just companies like our company doing something about carbon removal, but also for the mitigation and adaptation part. And obviously there's a huge infrastructure overhaul that's going to happen in the next 10 years. And governments can play a part there, and of course companies do as well. But you can support charging infrastructure or other kinds of climate transitioning infrastructure, and of course learn how to adapt your city and your environment. And then there was some talk about these trillions going into infrastructure globally every year. I think it would be a great idea if there was a carbon assessment into all of the dollars that flow out of those banks and into that infrastructure. Would we do those investments 5 years from now is a good question. And then also assessing the risk. So using new modeling to understand, is that infrastructure something that we should be building today? Yeah. But thanks, great to be here.
Thank you so much, Henrietta. Two things that I really took note from your comments are, one is that there's a wide variety of things that are needed and opportunities throughout the carbon cycle, right? So we need new ventures in this whole complex chain, yeah. And the other one is this notion about connecting assessment with finance, right? And the need to be, let's say, maybe bolder when doing that. So thanks for sharing that perspective. Chad, I want to turn to you for your comments and for you for sure to lead this conversation. Among several other roles that you have played over the years in business, technology, and you were the co-chair and founder of Sustainable Energy for All at the United Nations. So you've been seeing this for a long time, and you've been making change happen on the ground. So it's amazing to have you again here. Thank you for your leadership. Over to you, Chad.
Roberto, thanks very much. And let me start off by thanking you. You're the creator of this whole process. We went into a COVID-19 world. We could have gone undercover for GFCC. You went just the other way. And this series, I think, has been just really successful. And so I can't thank you enough for putting this all together and making it happen. Let me just mention 3 points that I think build on exactly what the rest of the panel has said. And the first one is the one you just referred to, Roberto, is Sustainable Energy for All. I was co-chair of that effort with Kande Yamkela from Sierra Leone. And Franny, as you were talking about your comments, it really struck, how much different the infrastructure questions are and issues are country by country. And if we try to sit in a nice air-conditioned New York or London and try to say what's needed in Sierra Leone, it's just not going to work. And so I think what the phrase I like is think local, resource global. Think local, resource global. Really understand what the issues are in Sierra Leone and the countries like that. But let's use all that knowledge that can come from everywhere in the world to help solve that problem. And be sure that we're listening to people as we go forward. I think that's critical as we build out this infrastructure the next time around. The second thing I think could add to this conversation is, let's think about the biggest infrastructure change in your lifetime. If you could just think for a minute, what has been the biggest infrastructure change you've gone through? My answer to that's the internet. Was it planned? Well, I'm sure in some people's minds it was planned, but some others it wasn't. But it probably changed the infrastructure more than anything else I can say. And I've been heavily involved and continue to be involved in the next big change that I think will be the greatest, and that's the energy system. And I believe we need to think boldly on how we change the energy system to make it truly a much better energy system for everybody, which means it will be different by country, building on the first point, but it needs to be terribly different. And so I keep thinking about what is the equivalent of the internet for the new energy system. Well, let me be clear, I don't have that answer yet, but I think it's a question that, Lisa, I think you're thinking about every day. I can tell from your comments earlier, but we have to come up with that. What is the fundamental structural change that will be needed to have an energy system that's really better than the one we have today? Not just low carbon, meets the needs, other needs of people in an extremely good way. Let me throw out one idea. It could be hydrogen. Hydrogen is not a source of energy. Hydrogen is a carrier of energy. It's a storing agent of energy. Could hydrogen, brought out the right way, very much like the Japanese government and MIDI envision it, be the equivalent of the internet of the new energy system? But those questions have to be asked too, while we're making progress every day. And thinking about Deborah's early comments about the legislation that's taken place in the US, it's obviously very major. But I went back and thought about, what is really big infrastructure change and what are examples in the US where that's happened. And I went back to 1956. The Federal Aid Act for Highways, which built the internet system, interstate system. It was 41,000 miles, and the pledge was every city over 100,000 people gets an interstate highway. I could imagine all the arguments that took place of us don't waste all this money on this big system. Let's just widen the current roads. There's all this other stuff. But that concept of really rethinking totally how we move people around and goods around, I think has made a big difference in the economic development of the country. So I think as we look at this infrastructure overall, not just energy, let's think big, just like the interstate system. And let's not be scared to make those really big investments. They can put us in a very different place in 2050 as we need to be with climate change going on. So I'll leave you with those 3 points. And I'd like to start our discussion. Let me just highlight what I took from each of you. Franny, your breadth and background and what you've done is going to bring so much to this conversation. But as I said earlier, you're thinking about the developing countries and how they're different. And I love the example of the cell phone, because to me that is a leapfrog of technology, and that's what we need to do, and not just in cell phones, which we've done, and we know what the barriers were that and got them broken down, but it's on energy and other aspects we go forward. Lisa, I loved your vertical horizontal thinking about this. It's a subject I think about a lot. It is very complicated. The science is unsettled, as my friend Steve Gooden wrote a book on. Not a very popular book, but it's out there. It's complicated. It's very complicated. And if that makes us scared to go do stuff, we'll regret that a lot, because we have a window. Mahmoud, as I've visited your country so many times, and I've marveled at how you're just a step ahead of almost every country in the world of demonstrating technologies. And you had the boldness to get out there and make it happen. And I've ridden in your driverless vehicles 7 years ago when nobody had driverless vehicles. So I just can't thank enough for what your country's doing and your university's doing to move us forward, because I think that's so important. We need to learn from it. Henrietta, carbon is, I think, the most exciting new area. And there's a lot of software in carbon too, because as we're coming to grips with the fact we can never just do without some things that are going to create greenhouse gases. We have to have the net part, the way it's sequestering. The current techniques that we're using are pretty antiquated. The idea of just shoot a bunch in the ground and put a real tight cap on it and make sure it stays there is not nearly as creative as what your company's doing. And what I think we're going to have is that's going to be the highest growth area, especially as governments get the right kind of penalties for releasing greenhouse gases, which is the issue today. But I just applaud you, for starting that now. And I think the fundamental concept you're on, using biology to solve the problem, is just really right on track. So let's have a great discussion. And Franny, could you kick us off with your next perspective? You'd like to build on other people's comments, or wherever you'd like to go. And then after you get through, I'm going to turn to Roberto and see if you have any questions from the chat or Q&A you'd like to throw out. Franny?
Well, thank you very much, Chad. And I'll pick on your first question, where you challenged us to think about what's going to be the next big revolution since the internet. And I think there are 3 potential competitors. One is water. I know we don't talk much about water, but that's the real hard nut to crack, in the coming years. And I mean, it's already a challenge in some countries, but it's going to be even a bigger challenge going forward. We either have too much of it with all the flooding we've been seeing from Mozambique to Germany to the middle states in the United States, or we have too little of it with the droughts, whether it's in the Sahel or in Australia or other parts of the world, including in California. Or we have poor quality because it's contaminated in the way we treat wastewater. So water, I think, is an area where we need a lot of innovation, a lot of catalytic solutions to challenge how we think about water so that we can solve this problem in the next decade. Otherwise, we're going to have a very challenging situation. The second one, and this comes from a combination of what is possible from science versus what is actually happening from design and construction and architectural solutions. And this is self-healing infrastructure. We have the material science available, we use it for space, but we haven't used it on Earth. And if we did, you would imagine, for example, this huge infrastructure bill to repair the infrastructure in the United States could, for the future, if one thinks about self-healing and self-repair mechanisms, because we have the technologies to observe failure, we have the material science to create self-repair, and we have all other kinds of solutions. That, I think, is the next big thing, because then we will embed maintenance into our design, and we won't have to always look for the funding 20, 30, 40 years down the line. And developing countries can start their infrastructure with this mindset, because that's the leapfrogging opportunity. But then the last one, and I think here I'm quite excited because there was there's a company that makes carpets that had a simple philosophy that says, we own the molecules. So they would take fossil fuel particles, make them into fibers that manufacture carpets. They would install those carpets, and when you needed a new one, they would come and remove it and give you a new one, and they use the same molecule. So they extracted only once. So these ideas of a circular economy, recycling, and extracting the molecules only once could give us a solution that could be perhaps in competition with owning the electrons, which is the electric side that we also have been following up on. And I think the hydrogen revolution is one excellent example where that sort of owning the molecules becomes very feasible, because if you take all of these ocean facing countries, they can generate blue-green hydrogen easily with barges that are going up and down, doing tourism, fishing, and at the same time generating hydrogen for transport and manufacturing and the power generation. So, but to me, water really remains the hard nut, because not much work has gone into it in the way, for example, that with the leadership you took in creating sustainable energy for all, we have now focused our minds on energy. I think we need a similar challenging effort for the water side.
Yeah, very great comments. Just to build on the water idea, I think you're clearly right. That's so critical to what's going on. Energy is required to get the water, so this is really a very complex system that fits together. But I found that one thing that businesses and governments can agree on is water. In our early work with the Business Roundtable in the U.S., the one thing everybody could agree on was water, and everybody pledged to have a water project. So I think we can't let water be left out of the conversation with energy so much on the table today. Really good point. Roberto, do you have a great question that's come in from our colleagues on the line?
So we got a few questions here, Chad. One, it's about what's the message that, let's say, developed advanced nations would have to emerging countries in order to drive this transformation? And we got a question from Malaysia. What's the advice that you could provide to emerging nations?
Okay, whatever panel member would like to take that, go ahead. You can make it just from your perspective or broader.
I'll try for that one. There's a couple things on my mind that might lead towards it, and I'll back up a little bit. First, I think the net of it would be, it's the entire innovation ecosystem. So if we don't, it's everything from the early stage, from the policy. And if you think about the fact that and this is a small plug for the electrification of everything, and hydrogen as a little bit of a red herring. Right now, we have a non-fossil fuel. We have solar and we have wind that are more cost effective than fossil fuels. It took 20 years to get here, tons of subsidy, tons of policy. It was a big, long journey. We are starting that big, long journey with hydrogen. It's a long time. So you have to have the early stage pieces. You have to have that investment. All the startups that started and failed, they were trying to use germanium instead of silicon, and then the cost of silicon crashed because there was some subsidies in China. I mean, you just have to be ready for that long journey. So when I would back up and say the innovation ecosystem means truly supporting companies at all stages, and then truly having policy that advances and perhaps subsidizes that early stage. So that would be concept number one. And then I would just sort of add to it, if I were going to give a message. I divide emerging economies into two parts. There's those that are contributing. Some of them are contributing. If you add up some of the developing economies, aggressively and fast developing economies, we're talking about 30 to 50% of emissions right now are coming. And then there's a bunch that didn't participate at all. They aren't the problem, and they are paying the first price. So they're the ones where the sea level rise is going to impact first. And it's just, so I think there's a little bit of you have every right, I would say, to demand support from those who put you in this situation. So there's a dual conversation, and this brings me to one other concept, which is to really think about the world divided into, there's carbon emissions and reduction, there's carbon sequestration. And I'm so thrilled that Henrietta's, we have that level of sophistication in this conversation, because we have to remove a bunch of carbon from the atmosphere and we have to stop producing it. And they really are different technologies evolving at a different pace. And sequestration is a little, thank God for Henrietta, it's a bit of a journey out. In the meantime, we're trying to produce less. And then there's this whole world of adaptation and resilience on the front end, where there will be lots of startups trying to help people deal with sea level rise and fire and heat domes and whatnot. So I would say that I would make the case for emerging markets to think about energy, about the entire energy ecosystem inside of, and which includes water, includes all the resources and natural resources, and then to think about it through the lens of adaptation and resilience, but don't get lost there. We have to adapt. We have to protect the 7 billion people that are already here, but we also have to protect the ones that are coming, and we won't do that without emissions reduction. And then, of course, in the long run, sequestration. Final thought, there is only $500 billion being invested. Everybody's talking about how 2020 and 2021 were the big years in investment in this space, and climate tech specifically. There's some BlackRock's launching a $7 billion fund. There's $500 million, $7 billion funds going on, totaling up to $500 billion. That's a lot of money, and everybody's thrilled. It is somewhere between 10 to 20% of what's needed. The numbers that you threw out, Roberto, I just want to make a case for some of the projectors I'm reading. Bloomberg is saying it's what do I have here? It's 50 trillion needed just in climate. I'm sorry, Bloomberg is 92 trillion, Powerhouse is 50 trillion just in climate. So we're off by orders of magnitude. So the other thing I would say is invest if you can. If you're one of the ones contributing, invest. So it's a 3-part message. It's a long one, but thanks for the platform.
Lisa, it's a great message, and you're exactly right. So let me put you on the spot if I could. So I have an opportunity for you. There's a group of all the countries in the world gathering in Glasgow in November, COP26. And I'm going to offer you the keynote speaking part, where all the heads of state are really there. And you can give one message of what they should do right now, November of this year in Glasgow, to make a difference. What's the 1 or 2 things they should do before they leave that country?
I would say climate is the only thing you should, fixing it is the only thing you should be ethically responsible for. Everything else, I have come at this from a place of, I have fought for women, I have fought for gender justice, I have fought for racial justice, and it all adds up to the fact that, oh my God, we're burning. We're going to be, the message that scientists and the ecosystem has delivered is just what they perceive the human brain can handle. It's about the real data. It's about 10x worse. So just back up, swallow the fact that it's 10 to 100x worse, depending on the category we're looking at, and just focus, and do 100x what you thought you were going to do. Drop everything and do it.
Hey, that's great. If I was in the audience, I'd be standing up clapping right now. So I think you're right on target. Great. Henrietta, I want to go back to why did you choose this particular aspect of carbon capture? What intrigued you about focusing here versus a wider remit or anything else you'd like to share at this point?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's these two things that we need to do. We need to reduce emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere, and we need to actually physically remove them. And when we were looking at these technologies and the toolkits out there, it just became clear that nature is far better at drawing down carbon than any human-made invention, because plants draw down carbon every single day by using solar power to lock down CO2. But of course, if those plants and trees decay or decompose, then they return the gases into the atmosphere. So what we do is we let nature do the heavy lifting, and we just turn that plant matter into a stable form called biocarbon, and this biocarbon stays stable for 1,000 years. So it just came across as the most elegant solution to actually drawing down carbon. And the carbon can actually have other ecosystem benefits on the side. So it seemed like a no-brainer, especially because a lot of the technologies that we might be looking at today, maybe momentarily, maybe for longer term, they may have huge energy input requirements or huge asset requirements, which we do as well, but not compared to perhaps some of the other solutions. So we wanted to minimize on how many emissions you have to make to be able to remove carbon, because it's of course counterproductive. And of course also you want to minimize the impact you have on the electricity grid that needs to transition green anyways. So you don't want to have extra demand on the grid when you're trying to turn it green. So those are kind of like a couple of the points that we weighed.
Oh, that's great. And how would you, if you're going to give yourself a letter grade on how you're doing so far, what grade would you give yourself?
Oh God. Well, everything should always happen faster and sooner and quicker, and I'm very impatient as a person. So I'm always calling up our technical staff like, why isn't it built already? But patience is key, I guess. So yeah, I guess we're pretty good. We're somewhere around what is like a B-, I don't know, something like that. But hey, I'm maybe we're being harder on ourselves. But a couple of things that would accelerate our growth, and this is something that if somebody's working in government can listen to, there's two things that governments can do to help companies like us. And one is give government-backed loans in these early stages. We don't need grants. We don't want anything like that. We just want a loan. But when you're in the early stages, commercial lenders might not want to venture out in the first risky phases. So government-backed loans, even for 50% of what people are asking, that would be great. And a faster turnaround, because companies don't have 9 months to wait around and wait for decisions and see what people say and hear the third committee. We don't have that time. So speed is key, and forget about making mistakes along the way. We're going to make mistakes, but we need to move faster. And then the second thing is that governments can act as a purchaser, and they can, of course, legislation is a third thing, like, we legislated for lead-free gasoline at some point, and that's why that went through and everything changed. Now, why can't we legislate for other stuff that's greener? But really acting as a long-term purchaser is one way to actually help those projects come online, whether it's from your own country or another country. It doesn't really matter in this crisis.
Yeah, great points. Really great points. I really support the loan idea. And that's what we found in Sustainable Energy for All. That was what's really critical and created the right dynamic when it took place. Deborah, I know you're not officially on this panel, but I can see you, so I think you can probably get in. So before I go to Mahmoud to talk about technology and what a difference it's going to make, you've been so active with the national laboratories in the US, and you've been a highly supportive of them on the boards. Can you say a few words for our global audience here about why those national laboratories are so important to us?
Yes, thank you, Chad. Well, these national laboratories in the United States, excuse me, starting with Los Alamos, Livermore, Sandia, Argonne, Oak Ridge, Pacific Northwest, et cetera, have really two critical missions. They're government missions that require large-scale investments and multidisciplinary research to accomplish missions. So the energy mission has always been at the heart of these labs, including the national security dimension. Why they are so important is that they also have very advanced user facilities, spallation, neutron sources, synchrotrons to do research at the cutting edge, but also to do very large-scale applied projects. So in the energy space, if you look at everything from nuclear, I mean, the whole peaceful use of nuclear energy coming out of World War II and all the science and innovation at the beginning of the 20th century were really put into use by these national laboratories. And, you know, today, no one's talked really yet on the energy transformation about what's happening in nuclear with small scale modular reactors that are clean and sustainable and don't take the amount of water and other things. But the national labs, in addition to doing these very complex government missions, they also bring in industry and partnerships, and they train tremendous talent to do big things. So I always use the example, Chad, at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, the new ignition facility, which is the size of 3 football fields, American football fields, they are simulating a star on Earth. And the impact of that for fusion and future energy is just, you know, tremendous. So they are both addressing issues now, but very much focused on the future. And so innovation is really the heart of their mission.
Oh, that's a great summary. And I like to stress one part you had there is they will work with companies. It's not just this massive research. They will work with companies to do development. So, Henrietta, I bet you could find a national lab that would help you with your carbon work.
Well, Chad, I have to say that back to the comments that have been made, and Henrietta and others, about the regulatory innovation that enables this. One of the great innovations in the United States in the mid-'80s was changing our laws and legislation that allowed these national labs to team with industry, to have big projects, how we dealt with intellectual property. So today, industry is very much involved in the fabric of this innovation at large scale.
Really key point. Mahmoud, now, tell us what we don't know about technology from your perspective.
Thanks, Chad. I think great insights was shared actually by the panelists. I may mention at the very beginning something counterintuitive actually. Sometimes we may need to start with a business model innovation. And many times there are technologies across, maybe in the sector or in different industry and so on, but is not utilized. And because the way we do the business, we need to do it in a different way. I'll just give you an example from the education perspective, for instance. The online education, the digital learning has been for a long time there, and it has been on a very small scale for a very long time. The technology was there, right? But the business model, the conventional business model was face-to-face in most cases. And when the pandemic came, everyone used the existing technology for digital and online learning. And there are quite significant sustainability impacts for this, like from CO2 emissions reduction from transportation, from facilities management, many things from that perspective. So in my perspective, there are technologies, I think, in many industries that can be transferred into other industries for technological sustainability in the different industry. That is one thing. And it has to do with the business model re-innovation or reinvention or transformation of a particular domain using current technologies. And of course, from the other angle of my view, what technology can do, or what advanced technology can do, everything was driven by technology, right? Like all the sustainable technologies were driven by technological innovations, and there are always next horizons to invent and innovate. And in my perspective, the concept of national laboratories and teaming up with the universities and the industries is a great example of how you can create a whole ecosystem from a deep technology R&D into commercialization, startups, and utilization. In Qatar, this is new, like R&D and having industry partnership and creating clusters of innovation is very new. And also in the country, it's very small to think about it. But I would probably think about our experience in the university and how we are emerging. We have created multiple clusters of research R&D, and many of them are related to sustainable development, like QMIC that I mentioned, Qatar Innovation Mobility Center, Materials Innovation Center, and so on. These, now we are in the process of, okay, we have done a lot of research and how we can transfer this research into startups and into new technologies. And we are trying to create new programs focus on thematic areas. One of them could be the smart cities, for instance, or smart technology startups acceleration, incubation acceleration programs, in which entrepreneurs who are interested in that particular area could actually work in. And if I think about similar programs for larger or more developed countries like USA and so on, probably particular incubation acceleration programs for technologies on sustainable developments can be developed, and like people like Pia, entrepreneurs who are champions who love these kind of things, and people like Elisa who are venture capitalists and enthusiasts to fund such programs can contribute to universities' efforts in that particular domain. So that's my nutshell in my thinking how technology can play. First, I think we have a lot of technologies that is existing, but probably we need to rethink the business model of a particular industry to be more sustainable. And second, there are always new horizons in development of technology, but this needs to be done in a more clustered way and in a more interconnected way between academia, government, and industry to accelerate the loop of inception or discovery of a new knowledge or technology into deployment and adoption and commercialization in terms of startups or whatever commercialization to happen.
Really good points. And again, thank you for your leadership and your university's leadership in this area. Before I go to Roberto for another question, let me bring up something that hasn't been talked about as much, but I want to make sure it stays in the conversation. Is there are 7 sectors that are so-called hard to abate: steel, cement, chemicals, road transport, that make up 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions. Now, it's very tempting to say if they're hard to abate, why don't we work on the easy stuff first? Because as Lisa pointed out, we've got the technology for so many things right here today that it's justified. It's good returns. We do need to invest in these 7 and get moving on them so we bring the technology out so we have the answers. Maybe we don't deploy them until the end of this decade. We need to bring them right now. And I'm very pleased to see that a number of NGOs have come together, led by the Rocky Mountain Institute, to create a Mission Possible partnership to try to help companies in doing that, help sectors in doing that. So I'm encouraged that there'll be some progress there because the cooperation is taking place, because the challenge is so great. Henrietta, did you have a point you wanted to make here?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point that why haven't we decarbonized these areas already? We know where the problem is, but the reason being that we haven't had to pay for pollution before. So actually we've been subsidizing these very, very polluting activities, not just in the kind of like where you naturally veer to, like, oh, the fossil fuel extraction and finding, etc., but actually also in these areas in industries and so forth. So now we need to think, okay, if these investments had a price on carbon, would they actually be profitable? And can we find other investments or make these materials somehow? I mean, steel can be easily 99% recycled and so forth. So can we make these, like the green premium, so to say, come lower? So the green premium in Bill Gates's new book is about how much more does the sustainable version cost to the alternative that we've been using today, or the more polluting version. And if we actually had a price on polluting, the green premium would not probably be higher than the polluting version. So we need to start thinking about these investments, whether you're in a company that is purchasing something or has a supply chain or something. We need to start looking at where those emissions are coming from, or if you're a government making huge decisions about infrastructure and future stuff. But it's good because all of this information is available. There's so many ways to calculate things nowadays. We can get to the bottom of this quite easily.
Yeah, thanks so much for making that comment, because I couldn't agree with you more. I don't think Bill Gates needs a plug for his book, but I found it a very readable book and really helped focus the mind on where the real opportunities are. So, Deborah.
Thank you. I wanted to add into the conversation, Chad, and you've worked in this area, of course, in your leadership of DuPont, is really the infrastructure of food and the transformation of agriculture, starting at the level of seeds all the way through production, the processing of food, the delivering things, and particularly in the context of the emerging world, really needing and should have, protein-rich diets. And the energy use, the water use, all of these things coming together are a huge sustainability issue and challenge. And so I would hope that some of our leaders here could talk a little bit about agriculture. And, one issue I know that has had a lot of discussion is the methane gases that come from rice production. Huge byproduct of rice production. And how can we, quote, capture and use that for other purposes as feedstocks, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Deborah. And let me just mention it briefly from our work there. But a very inefficient way to create protein is run it through an animal than eat the animal. Right? There's a lot better ways of getting protein than that from a efficiency standpoint and also for a health standpoint. So that technology is coming out now, and I think it's breaking very much like the carbon capture technology is breaking. I think that Henrietta is working on. I think this is breaking too. The whole idea of GMOs is kind of a bad thing, things labeled GMO free, but a genetically enhanced plant that can do better things for us is really a plus. And so we have an education job to do on how to use genetic modification really in a very safe, constructive way. So I think it's a really good point. Anybody else on the panel would like to add to the food question before we go back to other questions?
Yeah, I mean, the food question always goes back to like, why are the agricultures doing this or why are they not doing that? It's very personified, this question. But actually, food production is a whole system with subsidies and with companies acting in it and with the consumers and all sorts of stuff. So there's many kind of levers that we need to pull for the agricultural system to change or to go towards a more sustainable version. But I do think that there's a lot of consumer pull now. Of course, we need more. And then governments are also understanding that, for example, soils that we've been looking at, soils are depleting in many areas, and that's not easily replaceable. So now governments and perhaps local governments have started thinking about, okay, what do we actually do about this resource that we're letting flee through our hands by having these bad policies? And so it takes a lot of actors to actually change something so fundamental that we, of course, have such a emotional bond to as well. And another thing maybe about food and what you said about GMO, I find so fascinating is that I still don't know what all possibilities we have, but you said that the internet was the biggest thing that ever happened. I think biology and biotech is going to be the biggest thing that ever happens in the coming decade, because we have these new tools like microRNA that we can not just make COVID vaccines with, but we could make trees that are more drought resistant, or do all sorts of things that perhaps we shouldn't do without thinking about them carefully, but we have good research going ahead, and in some cases those ideas might be justified.
Great points. Roberto,
one more quick comment on food, please. Just on that piece of the emotional connection with consumers, not to restate that key point you made around about how complex the infrastructure is and the entire ecosystem, and I'll echo that, and then just pinpoint this idea of consumer preference. Consumers have not historically led the push towards clean. They have done increasingly. There's a movement, but it's a little slow and a little behind. But it's better than nothing, and it is driving a lot of the investment now and the demands for carbon accounting and some of these really big advances. Just this sliver of opportunity in food is really this. When you think about the nutritional index that sits on packaging, and the advance in a couple of years ago where you started to have to post if you're at a fast food restaurant how many calories. We've got an obesity crisis in the United States, and really having to actually get that information into the packaging really did make a difference. People finally had information, and then it just increases the likelihood that consumers will push. So right now people don't know about the carbon footprint of their food, and they can't make decisions. And to the extent that the externalities, there is no price on carbon in the US, and in some cases, and the externalities are not factored in, at least it gives consumers an opportunity to do so. I'll just make that one plug for the food industry to just provide that power to consumers, so that even though we're a little slow, we can have the impact that we might want to have.
Lisa, that's a really great point. And leading food companies could do that tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow.
They could take that step. And my guess is that 2 or 3 leading food companies do it, all the rest would have to follow. So right. Great intervention. Roberto, now one more good question.
So maybe we could bundle several questions here, Chad. I think we got amazing questions. And so I'll try to combine those. One really is about new revenue sources, and Rieta has replied to that, but it's really about thinking business models related to infrastructure and, let's say, sustainability. What are the new revenue sources that could drive change, right? And I think that connects to what Mahmoud said about cross-pollinating things and creating, from a business perspective, leveraging technology to create new revenue sources. The second type of question that we got here, it's about the assessment of infrastructures considering their complete life cycles. So we get one question about maintenance and how that could be thought in terms of policy frameworks and investment frameworks in considering what's needed to maintain infrastructures. And the other one is how to embed into infrastructure investments and policies the issue about circularity. Yeah, so that's the other thing. And finally, there's a question about the gaps. So that's to you, Chad. So they say, hey, what are the main gaps that you, Chad, see that we need to fill in order to accelerate energy transition? So 3 things: new revenue models, and that could allow us to accelerate, let's say, sustainable infrastructures. The second one about understanding the whole life cycle, considering maintenance, how can we design circularity? And third, what are the gaps?
Yeah, so who would like to start? I'll take your Rieta, go start and then give all the
I don't want to talk all the time, but I think I'm just going to come back to the idea of green premiums. So how do we lower the green premiums? By making polluters pay. And now the carbon market is the first version of like money changing hands from somebody who's polluting too much needs to buy this cleanup, so to say, from another one. And this could happen across industries in garbage in, different kinds of pollutions, not just CO2, different kinds of gases and anything that we can imagine. But the idea is that if you're doing something destructive or polluting, you would have to pay. And through that, we would bring the sustainable alternatives cheaper, so to say. And so I think that's the way that the business models will work for infra in the future, hopefully.
Lisa, your comments?
I'll reiterate that. I mean, it's the ugliest word in policy is carbon tax, but that's another angle on. But I'll make a case that if the cost of carbon isn't embedded into the economy, into the ecosystem in some more tangible way, and nobody's accountable for paying for it, we won't rein this in. It just won't, we can't stop it fast enough. So one way or another, we've got lots of examples of it. There's lots of different models for it. There's cap and trade. We've got the CAFE standards. We've got there's different industries and verticals who've had to deal with different aspects of it and continue to thrive. So, my whole angle of got to make lots and lots of money for lots of people by growing amazing companies that solve the problem sits inside of a mechanism that could move that entire engine much, much faster, which is including the cost of carbon tangibly into the ecosystem.
I just couldn't agree more. And, Deborah, I think about where you stand in the US right now with how do you pay for a $3 trillion something or another. It's right in front of our nose that a carbon tax could be a part of that. No politicians like to vote for taxes, but this might be a time they could do it. And to miss this opportunity, I hope the U.S. Council is doing everything they can to help people see this is really an opportunity to have at least take a step in the right direction.
Well, Chad, when the U.S. Council launched our groundbreaking work, Energy Security, Innovation, and Sustainability, back in 2007, the concept was a little bit way ahead of the curve in looking at these three components. But our groundbreaking report called for a transparent price on carbon back in 2009. We didn't get into whether it should be cap and trade or a tax, but what everyone is saying here, we have to have a transparent price on carbon. And we need to now more than ever move that forward.
Yeah. I just aside, we were working on a U.S. cap and trade proposal that got through the House and didn't get through the Senate. And I was in with a group of other business people talking to a bipartisan group of senators off the record and describing cap and trade. It's a little complicated. And this one senator said, by the time we get through it, it'll be really complicated. And this was a very conservative Republican senator. He said, I will deny it if you ever quote me on it, so I won't quote him. But he said, I don't know why you just don't tax the stuff. That would be a lot simpler. And so I think that an element of how to get there would be some kind of cost of carbon, and we know how to do taxes. So, Mahmoud, anything to add at this point?
Actually, I totally agree. It should be government enforced kind of taxation or policy or kind of things at the initial stage to fund or to get some stream of funds, for instance, for sustainable developments or sustainable infrastructure. The other thing, maybe governments, like let's say for instance, now there's $1 trillion bill in the US, just an example for infrastructure. And probably this infrastructure development is not considering sustainable technologies in a very systematic and integrated manner. Maybe a portion of this bill can be put to support business model innovations for sustainable technologies, for instance. In Qatar, taxes not existence very much actually. So like government intervention from tax perspective is not very much possible, but from policy perspective, it's possible. For instance, a policy can be put on the oil and gas, for instance, industry to consider particular business models that is more circular or more sustainable. That could happen here in the country.
It's really helpful. Roberto, I think we only have about 5 minutes left. So
5 minutes to go.
We'll go around to every panel member, including Deborah, to make a last comment you'd like to leave with the folks who joined us today. And Roberto, you'll get the last word when we get ready to close. Deborah, closing thought?
Thank you, Chad. Well, I'll just close by saying that infrastructure has always been the enabling platform for human life and progress and security. And when you recognize the new needs and challenges and seize the opportunities, it's innovation at the heart. And I'll just say there are sort of 5 things we need to do. 1, modernize existing infrastructure. 2, repurpose infrastructure for multi-use. 3, build sustainability and resiliency into all infrastructure platforms. Imagine, design, and build new futures, and include all stakeholders through the public-private partnerships to create the new future.
Oh, that's great. Great summary. Henrietta, what would yours be?
I want to say again that every single thing should be looked at through the lens of reducing carbon. So my type of people who try to remove the carbon can maybe get us a third of the way if we're very, very, very lucky. 2/3 has to be reduction. So every single thing that anybody does in business or academia or in government needs to be through the lens of carbon reduction. And that's my point. Thank you.
Great guidance. Lisa?
The nuanced side point that the technology, if we leverage just the technology we have right now, we can get the majority of the way, so that we don't red herring our way into a sort of future thinking, well, this is coming, that's coming. Right now it's available. And if we really look at where we are with AI and ML and some of the IoT advances, and where we are with clean energy on the solar and wind level and some of the electrification, it's all of it's I think the calculation is something like 92% we can get done with the existing tech. So I would just say beware of fantasy thinking or running things in parallel where the lines don't cross in time.
Yeah, Lisa, I just want to second exactly what you said, because we have got to move right now on what we have. Yeah, there might be a more perfect system out in the future, as I was implying. But if we don't move right now, I mean, this year,
right,
with massive movement, and what we're doing now is nowhere close to massive. You quoted the numbers earlier. We just got to do that. And somehow, collectively, we all have to find a way to do that. And I think we can. I think it's possible. No question it's possible. So I couldn't agree more. Mahmoud?
Thanks, Chad. I second Elisa, and I second you on this. We have several technologies, we have several solutions existing. It's just we need to rethink ways of doing things, the business model. And what you refer to is the adoption issue, actually. And this will require a system or ecosystem approach that work on policy, regulatory, awareness, raising awareness and capabilities, as well as integration of industry, academia, and government into clusters of innovation and diffusion for adoption across the different communities and sectors. So that's my take as a solution. But again, we need to move now directly with what we have, and we can progress a lot actually with what we have.
Oh, fantastic. Great question. By the way, you notice Franny had to drop off. We knew she had to drop for another event. It wasn't because she didn't like the conversation, all right? She supported the conversation very much. Roberto, it's yours to close.
Thank you, Chad. Thanks for leading this amazing conversation. I think that what brings hope to this is to see people like you all who are addressing these critical topics coming from different perspectives. This is a puzzle. Many of the pieces are out there. We need to connect those and maybe combine elements that we already have in new ways, reimagine how we do things using legal pieces that are already there. It brings me a lot of hope to see people coming from design, young entrepreneurs, academia, business, and this is gaining momentum. I think this is the message. But we will need systemic solutions, as you said, right? So thank you so much for that. Before we go, two quick things. One is that we always take a picture as a GFCC tradition here. So we would like to invite you all to turn on your cameras, and my colleagues Vanessa, Simone, and Riley, who made this possible. So we'll take a group picture. And the second thing is that this conversation will be continued. So every 2 weeks, we're having a session here trying to bring light into the topics that are essential for future competitiveness. We got some questions here about the connections between innovation and innovation in the space that we're talking about and competitiveness. We really see those things not competing, but really innovating as a way to drive future competitiveness. So please stay tuned. On the 25th, we're having a conversation about public-private partnerships. So join us, and we will shortly share with everybody who has signed up for the various session a page in which we are putting a variety of resources coming out of this conversation series. The videos, the sessions, the reports that we're creating, the teasers, and also links, reports, cases, and best practices that you, this community, is feeding into us. So please stay tuned. It was great to see you here. I hope to see you on August the 25th.